Hi, my name is Mark Ward and I'm the Festival Programmer for the Redline Book Festival, brought to you by South Dublin Libraries. We're delighted to be celebrating our 10th anniversary festival with 84 events happening in person, online or both. Please check out redlinebookfestival.ie for the full programme, and the festival runs until Sunday the 17th of October. We're thrilled this evening to be hosting salmon poet Liz Quirk and gallery press poet Annemarie Ní Churreáin in conversation with Jessica Traynor, talking about their second collections, How We Arrive in Winter and the Poison Glen. We've yet more poetry coming throughout the week, with Dalkin Cellar Open Mic Night happening at North Glendalkin Library tomorrow, and we're delighted to be hosting legendary poet Paul Muldoon reading from his yet-to-be-released collection, Howdy Scalp. But first, let's enter the world of second collections with Liz Quirk and Annemarie Ní Churreáin in conversation with Jessica Traynor.
Hi, I'm Jessica Traynor, and I'm delighted to be joined by poets Liz Quirk and Annemarie Ní Churreáin at today's Redline Book Festival event, where we'll be hearing some readings and chatting about the challenges and rewards of second collections. So first, to introduce Annemarie. Annemarie Ní Churreáin is a poet from Donegal. Her debut collection, Bloodroot, from Dira Press, was shortlisted for the Shine Strong Award for Best First Collection in Ireland and for the 2018 Julie Suk Award in the USA. She is also the author of Town from the Salvage Press and the recipient of a Next Generation Artist Award from the President of Ireland on behalf of the Arts Council. Ní Churreáin has received literary fellowships from Jack Kerouac House, Orlando, Academy Schloss Solitude in Germany, and Hawthornden Castle, Scotland. She's a 2019 co-recipient of the Markievicz Award, and she was the 2019 to 2020 Writer-in-Residence at NUI Maynooth. In 2020, she was commissioned by Solstice Arts to write a long-length poem called The Foundling Crib, which forms the heart of her new collection, The Poison Glen, which will be published and launched on the 22nd of October from the Gallery Press. To introduce Liz Quirk. Liz is a writer and scholar from County Kerry. Her poetry has appeared in many publications, including New Irish Writing and the Irish Times, the Irish Examiner, Southword, the Stinging Fly, Poetry Ireland Review, and the Manchester Review. She was the winner of the 2017 Listowel Writers' Week Original Short Poem Competition, 2016 Dromineer Literary Flash Fiction Competition, the 2015 Poems for Patience Competition, and the 2012 Donegal Literary Festival Edmund Spencer Poetry Prize. She was shortlisted for the Court New Writing Prize in 2015 and nominated for a Hennessy Literary Award. Salmon Poetry published her debut collection, The Road Slowly, in 2018, and her second collection, How We Arrive in Winter, is out now from Salmon Press and already garnering fantastic reviews. She teaches on the MA in Writing at NUI Galway and is completing a practice-based PhD on queer kinship in contemporary poetry. So thank you both so much for joining us here today, and we're really, really excited to hear you read. And so Annemarie, if you'd like to start us off by reading a few poems from the Poison Glen.
Sure, I'd be delighted to, and I'm really thrilled to be sharing this online space with you both. I can't wait to hear your poems read aloud, Liz. I'll read 3 sections of The Foundling Crib, which was commissioned by Solstice Arts Centre. It's a long poem that references various histories attached to the current site of St James's Hospital in Dublin 8, specifically that of the old Foundling Hospital of the 1700s. In 1730, a foundling crib inside a revolving wheel was installed on the site, and it's estimated that by the time the hospital closed to new admissions, as many as 200,000 children had passed through. So the poem is 10 parts in full, and I'll read 3. 1. By lamplight, an aged map of Dublin reveals the city as preached by Swift. Scant lanes and alleys that run like ghost veins, pulsing the blood of women who once begged for bread and alms, who cupped their palms to strangers. In Cutthroat Place and Murdering Lane, I look down along the black steps of 3 centuries or more. I can hear the throb of water rising out of ling and heather bogs. Source is another word for church. In Rome, the poorest mothers left infants by the Tiber, and later among the nets, the fishermen found the tangled bones. Did they lay these bones out as treasure? Did they toss them back into water? Every river knows the weight of hunger. Anna Liffey, give us back our bodies. The stories of all our mothers are written on the inner walls of this city into which I was born. 3. In the winter of the great frost, a stillness so cold that even the Liffey tongue grew stiff. For 7 long weeks the potatoes turned to rot, like teeth in some strange parable. Children stripped bare the orchards, hedges, ornamental trees. The coal ferries waited in the harbour. In the Liberties a shortage of wheat, the weavers said, as they shook their heads at wool piled up and wheels drawn to a stop. No mercy from the landlord, no mercy from the church. In McCaffrey's field the cows kneeled down to rest their bony skulls upon the grass until the last candles in their eyes went out. Those men and women with a flame left in their heads flocked to the living tomb, clutching meal tickets like pale love letters to the bone. What obedient servants hunger makes of us in every faith. Outside the tomb's entry, the city foundling crib rocked back and forth in a blade of east wind. Leave here your papist young. 5. 100 miles Bridget crossed on foot to place her newborn girl into the foundling crib. Hewn of stone and neatly chiselled, the bell was rung and sun or moon the wheel revolved, no questions asked. Hush, little bog child, through this blind portal, did Bridget look as the wheel turned? Did her hands tremble? Only the gulls can know the secrets of the dead. Out of every parish and across the Irish Sea the women came. On the other side, the record states what the porter found, looped to infant wrists and toes, talismanic medals, prayers, names and dates of birth. Now where no mother stands, I stand, in the milky scent of a butterfly bush that springs like a bruise of earth, winters and winters after the wound, an intercession. I am not she, I am mother. She is not forgotten. She is my daughter.
Thank you so much for that, Anne-Marie. Wonderful. Liz, would you like to read a few for us now?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. That was fantastic. Honestly, I just want to say that before I read. So I'm just going to read 3 poems from the first part of How We Arrive in Winter. It's a collection that deals mostly with the illness and death of my father. So not the easiest fare, but we'll see how we go. This is How We Arrive in Winter. We luxuriate beneath the jacaranda while it rains. You discard all your coverings, utter a challenge as we inhabit this, our first deluge. I keep myself together. Understand you're here with me only because you can't be there. The water pushes into your pores, threatens to flood you with reminders of how confining our small courtyard all the way across the world really is. It rains. You scratch furrows into your skin, endured this Sydney summer rainstorm like I've handed you an unwelcome gift. She has been dead a month. You mind the roadside graveyard where you left her, all its lonely territories. So anytime life blooms in unexpected ways, you clutch it till your body racks and heaves. We are too young in our love to have the words for this. No one can tell me when the right thing to say will come. In this grief memory we are making, for you I can be brave. I drop my shorts and shirt to meet yours, experience the way the confines of this continent shatter you. I meet you where you hold yourself aching, settle in your wake until I am not 23 and awkward. Eventually the rainfall slows, close my grate to the open top washer, and we endure season after season until 10 whole years pass by. It rains on ash boughs now, instead of fragrant frangipani. We root ourselves in dark brown soil where once our earth loomed red. At night we see our breath, and cold to your bones you say, "Can you believe she's dead so long?" I say, "I dreamed him the other night, but he couldn't speak. I've forgotten his voice outside of how he said my name." This is how we arrive in winter, how we can stand to stay outside, breathing as all we love turns to mush. Sometimes I wish we had suspended time in that shotgun house on Camden Street, that we had the safety of the middle room where we nested into each other like fledglings. When it's bad, I ask you, could we ever go back? Could we try unanswer the phone calls that carried us home? I see myself back at my desk. The hard yards between Newtown and Rhodes soften. Work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep, work. Weekday beers with Rich and Sam in the courty. It's then I remember times when my phone would blare and it's him, always him calling. And I describe the platforms I wait on, how the air feels acrid and too warm in my mouth. And we talk out all news and non-news through Strathfield, Stanmore, lose him under the bridge to Newtown. Tell him I'll call him again when I'm up on King Street. And when I do, the conversation turns to this and that. I promise him I'm safe. I'm nearly home. I'm nearly home. I'm nearly home. So the project of this book and some of the poems within it was to make a sort of sense of the senseless and to answer some questions that revolved around my father's illness. I wasn't really asking the question why, because you can't answer that, but I was sort of looking for an answer to the how. I wanted to know what was happening to his body. So this poem, The Promise of Sweetbread, is largely about the idea that sweetbread is made of like inner morsels of the body, all the icky, ooey organs. And I just wanted to kind of riff on the idea of there being nourishment found out of the very articles that were not slowly, killing my father. This is called The Promise of Sweetbread. Like everything, this begins in the tissue. Mutation concealed where no light gathers, and it's left to me to explain how a delicacy can be fashioned from such offending material. Demonstrate how to pluck items from your torso to defend and keep you longer. Milk white, a telling liquor from the drain in your side, dislodged poison, spilling your secrets, millimetre by marked up milliliter. I've already promised that I'll make something new from this. Articulate instructions you've left in soluble particles to adhere to my own structures for always. Ridged in the moss plied from your paving stones. Ways to give life to listless, unmoving articles. I'm chaperoning mementos like you showed me. Corralling, deciding which meat meets the scrap heap and what these days will keep. So come beside me while you can argue such vanity. Help me raise totems from their ward wall lurking. Split hairs with me over thymus, throat, gullet versus pancreas, heart, belly. We can talk immunity and T cells over steeping blends from deepest, darkest non-geography. that loose leaf that comes out on occasion, weddings mostly, not this time when the priest calls to the door. They have email addresses on cards now, such a foul piece of architecture, worse than a low call number. I won't get there on time, but parts of you are in my pocket. I'll hide them in my upper anterior directly behind my sternum, and I challenge any tape measuring box ticker to crack me open. I'm keeping your elements until I can devise a recipe bold enough to sweeten with all the things you promised, the inner body items that require all the stars in the system, pink grey loads, those splitting molecules that recognize that there has never been such a call for light as this. So part of the process of the ritual of funerals and all that, you encounter people from the past that you may have forgotten. So there's some kind of a return of looming ghosts and spectres from my youth in this next one. It's called Going to Ground. Hope he's holed up in an archive of weekend melodies, memories of how after breakfast they would dance. Been advised to dig, keep sinking a spade till I hit hell or acceptance. But this is beyond me. A mirage of the fires that stole my sleep when lullabies were my parents' low voices lifting up through the floorboards. My dreams now see him dead, and he offers his armchair to soothe my rattling bones. He knows I've never spoken about being alone in the house after leaving the hospital the first time. I used my old key, slipped through spectral behind his cars, fired up the Land Rover and frightened poor Brigitte across the road. How I didn't know we would rely on the owl stock, Sonia and her mother and their bags of tea and biscuits. The way I was quick to introduce my wife, even though it has been decades since we spent evenings playing curbs. They're all gone now, the big strong men of the avenue. Sonia's granddad, my father, those who knew each other since short pants and handball alleys, when getting a job was more likely than anything. And if you had a trade to your name and your own box of tools, you were made. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Liz and Anne-Marie. Just delightful to hear work by two poets at the peak of their powers, I really feel. And I'd love to kind of start our conversation a little bit by just talking about second collections and that notion of the difficult second album. And I think, kind of knowing both your first collections and having read both of these, I feel that there's a deepening of some themes and then new explorations taking place. Can you both talk to me a little bit about that journey between first and second collections and how it was for you? Liz, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, the journey to the second collection for me was kind of shockingly organic, because as in the first collection where it was all about kind of making a family, this collection was very much about my notions of family being dismantled and basically having a grenade thrown into everything I felt was solid. So it wasn't, I had another project kind of planned, which will be my third collection. But this one was very much, it kind of hooked into my research as well, thinking really deeply on ideas of kinship. And then I went back to I still have obsessions about the body and its inner workings and things like that. So it was very organic. And I didn't realize I was writing it until about halfway through. So yeah, it was kind of a surprise, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we all have these kind of ideas, and especially as we progress as artists about, and the next project will be this, and this is the art that I will make, but actually then it's your life that makes the art to a great extent as well, and I think that emotion, although it's beautifully poised and controlled, is so much there, and it's the kind of the engine at the heart of the work, which is wonderful. And Anne-Marie, talk to me a little bit about your journey towards this second collection.
I loved what Liz said there about the surprise, and I think the challenge for me with this book was to do what we're always trying to do, which is to face into the unknown or face into that mysterious place and kind of draw from what Nuala Ní Churreáin said is the plumb line into the subconscious. So I think probably it was a surprise all along the way. I never expected to write the founding crib, but when Solstice commissioned me, it was a time of lockdown, and I found myself at home in Dublin 8 and thinking about the landscape here and realizing that I've been here for quite a long time now and not properly interrogated the history of the area, and was just amazed to discover that I live exactly next door to where the old Foundling Hospital once stood, and amazed that there is no marker on site. So the book became, or the poem became, a kind of historical marker, or I hope it is kind of it's a gesture, it's a historical marker. And then I think kind of in the writing of the book, all sorts of surprises began to happen. I think in my first collection, I was really interested in the use of space on the page and in rupturing the lines. And this collection, kind of a collection that unfolded through a kind of fable or a storytelling voice. And the lines and sentences are much closer together, and the poems are in conversation with each other, and history and myth are in conversation with each other. So there was a togetherness, I suppose, of this book that I was not expecting.
It's so interesting. I remember when I put my first collection together, Pat Boren, my editor, said to me, try not to make it a kitchen sink book, because so many first collections are maybe 10 or 15 years in the making. And therefore you have a huge amount of life and different experiences. Whereas I think kind of time contracts a little bit in that second collection, and both in terms of, most of us are hoping to publish a book every 3 or 4 years, maybe. So you've got 3 or 4 years to deal with. But, there's also that kind of, I suppose, intensification of vision, which I see in both of these books. And I'm glad you mentioned form, Annemarie, because it's one of the things I'm so interested about in both of these books. These books have sequences at their heart. They have longer form poems. And that seems really important in terms of both of your quite different projects. Liz, were sequences something that you were interested in the exploration of this book, or did they kind of just present themselves as the right form for you to discuss grief and things like that?
I suppose what happened with the sequences was very much that the sequences appeared in the writing and drafting of the poems. There was something I couldn't wrangle with in a short or 40-line lyric. It needed something more expansive, and I see the parts of the sequence as nearly being vessels for episodes of memory or episodes of feeling, and you can kind of turn the poem then on the head of a pin and ask it to do different things. And if you have it blocked out sequentially, the reader will probably be more forgiving of the turns that you can take. Also, I felt very safe in a few of the sequences because I'm picking through memory and looking at things from a variety of perspectives, but the sequence gave me sort of boundaries in a way. Yeah. It's like, okay, this doesn't, your thought process here doesn't need to be linear. You don't necessarily have to have a smooth narrative arc. You can have this discordant, near dissonant turning in the poems. So I felt that the rangier the subject matter and the less of a handle I had on it, the more I wanted to kind of corral it within the boundaries of a sequence. I mean, the longest sequence in the book is 10 parts. In my first collection, I think there's a 4-part sequence that was an accident, whereas this has definitely been more of a conscious arrangement of the work and just the kind of the best way to show things. So yeah, that was kind of just that kind of safety and the ability to contain material, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And to contain multitudes, because I mean, one of the things that struck me so much about this book is just the profusion of beautifully chosen detail. And even in particular around things like the hospital spaces, the kind of functions of the body that you mentioned in the Sweetbreads poem that you read, which is one of the ones that really struck me. And did it feel important to you to kind of anatomize grief in that way, in terms of both the spaces where you experience these slow or sudden goodbyes, and also things like tools, cars, the people who visited? It's such a fantastic process of reclamation in a way. Did that feel important to you?
Well, what I was trying to do was pay attention. That was the main thing. And the things that I would pay attention to are those things, the bodily items, the bric-a-brac, the paraphernalia that's associated with illness and death. All of a sudden you get this vocabulary that's landed on you. And there's certain things that happen, and all of a sudden, like different colors have a different resonance for me now. Or I would view the street that I grew up on in a different way because I've experienced it. I've experienced a different, more effective set of relationships with neighbours now, and there seems to be how the context of grieving is built. It's like an accumulation of these things. It's the drawer full of tools and coins and little light bulbs for the backs of cars. It's the detritus that was left over after illness, when you're gathering up all this paraphernalia that fit one person in a bespoke way, but doesn't actually have any resonance for us apart from gathering things. So yeah, it was very important for me to capture all of that. I wanted it to be monumental, as in I wanted to render these things important, the paraphernalia, the ephemera, the bits and bobs. Like a washer could have massive significance for me. And it would be like I have framed a receipt from the pint that my parents had after my book launch when my dad wasn't supposed to be alive, but he escaped and drove up the country with my mother, and everyone was roaring around the place looking for them. You know what I mean? So those things for me are very, very important. And that's the kind of stuff that the things I'll frame and the things I'll write are, I suppose, everything I want to keep.
Yes, yeah. And it's amazing because it kind of brings me so neatly to what you're trying to do with the Foundling Crib as well, and what you're achieving so beautifully, Annemarie, is that sense of a monument where perhaps there isn't a monument. And the process of kind of excavating those stories and those experiences. And talk to me again a little bit more about the sequence and about the research that you did, and about Bridget and her daughter. I really hope that's a true story, but I'll forgive you for making it up if you were taking poetic license. Talk to me a little bit more about it.
I know I did do quite a lot of research for it. I mean, the first thing I wanted to do was to spend as much time as possible on the site where the Foundling Hospital stood. But then I also drew very heavily from an extraordinary book by authors Mary and Davis Coakley, which is titled The History and Heritage of St. James's Hospital. And that kind of provided kind of a gateway for me into lots of different worlds and lots of different histories. Yes, the story of Bridget Kearney is true, and it's written in the archives that she was one of the many women who had to bring her child to the hospital. I mean, women came from all over Ireland. People were paid as carriers to bring infants to the hospital. People even came from overseas. So it's quite an astonishing history. And there are records surviving. And Bridget Kearney did manage to raise the funds, I think with help from a brother, to come back and to bring her child back. And I suppose in writing this book and in writing the Foundling Crib, and I was just thinking about challenges this morning. I think one of the ongoing challenges and big questions for me, and maybe a lot of writers are thinking about it at the moment, is how to work ethically with sensitive or difficult material. I think that at this moment in history, which comes after so much change, that there is a lot of writing on the subject of trauma. There needs to be a lot of writing on the subject of trauma. And different writers are thinking about how do we use form and poetry space to write about this, but to do it respectfully as well. And so one of the things I wanted to do with the Foundling Crib was not to perpetrate a secondary violence, not to exploit this story belonged to Bridget, but to make sure that the fullness of her story, it was kind of honoured in that, she was reunited with her child. So that sequence or that part of the poem ends with the lines together again. And those are two very important lines for me in the whole poem, because it kind of restores. I think Liz was kind of pointing to, that restoration and keeping things in place or putting things back in place. And it was important for me to tell the reader, that these two people were reunited again.
Yes, well, I'm grateful you told us that bit, because it helped me unbreak my heart after some of what had preceded it. It's a really, really moving piece. And to go back a little bit to the notion of long form poetry, you wrote this during lockdown. You mentioned that it was a commission you received during lockdown. And did you find the kind of nature of lockdown, and I suppose that sense of us all being confined to a smaller space, did that kind of facilitate a kind of a looking inward and maybe a lengthening of the form? Did you find that kind of felt easier in that situation?
I had this conversation with a few different writers, and I don't know how you feel about this, Liz, but I think there was something about being locked down in space that made me want to kind of eke out or claim space on the page. So the poems kept getting kind of longer and longer. The collection kept getting longer and longer. It's been cut down since. But absolutely, I think there's something about the psychological state that we were in and feeling kind of boxed in and wanting to spread our wings on the page. The other thing that really happened to me was that I was locked down in Dublin, and I love this landscape. I'm very connected to it and was writing about it. But I also began to think of the landscape of Northwest Donegal, which is where I'm from. And I, in between lockdowns, used to take trips up to Northwest Donegal. And it's like that landscape really kind of drifted into focus, landscape that I am very familiar with. I'm very familiar with the stories and legends and folklore attached to that landscape. But I began to see them in a new light. As we all did, we all began to look at things in a slightly different light.
Yeah, we found new psychic landscapes to make up for our isolation. But it's interesting because I think it's, I don't think Joyce could ever have written Ulysses if he had to stay in Dublin. And I think there's something of landscapes of the mind, which we all managed to inhabit a little bit more. Although I do think, we've all got our lockdown sequences and we might have to all go and ritually burn most of them. I think in my case, maybe rather than inflicting them on the public. But no, I think very, very glad that you took this opportunity, Annemarie, because I think what's come out of it is really fantastic. I'd love us to hear a few more poems before I ask you a few more questions. So Annemarie, will you read us another couple of poems, please?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. I'll read one of the myth poems from the book. The myth of the Poison Glen in Donegal is very central to the book, and the Poison Glen is part of the landscape where I grew up in Donegal, and it's a very auspicious site in Irish mythology. And it's associated with the story of Balor of the Evil Eye, who locked his daughter Ethna into a tower, and he stole 3 of her children, and one child survived, Lu, the god of light. So the story often centres around Balor and Lu, but in my retelling, I was really interested in the experiences of Ethna, the daughter, who was locked in the tower. And this poem makes reference to the flower Mont Brisha, which in Irish is known as Felistram Jerrig. A villager speaks of Ethna. How many men did it take to drag the girl up into the island tower? Did she spit or kick? Did she try to bite through woolen binds, lifting clumps of skin hair blood beneath a fingernail? Did she struggle? Or was she simply led like a calf by hazel switch into a den? An island daughter bears the rage of pirates in her bones. An island daughter can empty tombs with a curse. Here in the aftermoon of all that followed infant's marriage loss, a badger lies wide open in the Poison Glen, red felistram spilling out. It is written here among the heather rocks and electric eyes. She was not her father's animal. She was not her husband's prize. I'm just going to go back for a moment to the Dublin 8 landscape. Anyone who's familiar with this area might know of a memorial plaque in the Liberties, which marks the deaths in 1825 of two women who were trying to reach the Rotunda Hospital and who perished in the snow with their newborn babies. And it was a tragedy that led to the founding of the Coombe Lying In Hospital in 1826. Baptism at the Liberties, winter 1825. Was she one woman, or was she two, towards winter's end, as she struggled through the Liberties in the sinking snow, ankle, knee, thigh deep into the lily feathers of that night, until the city seemed a dream within a dream? She thought she saw an oil lamp burning in the road ahead. She thought she heard a voice calling out her name. The cold was a tunnel and she climbed in. Mother, have mercy. The pain was a cord. The pain was a silk thread spooling thin against the earth as she hung on and hung on, breath by breath, like a woman with a raven clawing out of her breast. Rotunda, rotunda, rotunda. At first light announcing the Liffey, she was found. She was dug out from beneath a robe of snow, hands stiff in prayer and clasped inside her shawl, a newborn child, the small cheek frozen to her collarbone, like a white apple unfallen from a bough. The seed eyes opened but blinded by snow dust. It was too early, it was too late. She was every woman who kneeled alone less than 2 miles from the hospital to scoop water upon the forehead of her dying child. In the name of the city, I set this child free from the sins of only this city. Make this child a temple of only my glory, and go my own self to dwell with this child. Let us pray. So I was commissioned by the Lighthouse Project last year to work with artist Laura Sheeran on a collaboration and to create a new poem in response to Fanad Lighthouse in Donegal. The film poem eventually ran in the Lighthouse as part of the Errigal Arts Festival. It was a beautiful project curated by Danny Gill. So this poem or this piece draws upon fishing and coastal superstition. I've big interest in folklore, and this piece calls upon the voices of the ancestral mothers who I often felt were steering and guiding the writing of this book. A Blessing of the Boats by the Village Mothers. Solace upon the hand, upon the wrist, upon the vein. On this day of sailing we must honour the gods. Step with your right foot first into these boats we have stitched for you from oxhide, hazel, sally rods and dirt. With this wren's feather we bond you to light and ask that you let go old grudges against the barefoot sister, the red-haired sister, the sister who rises up fish-tailed between the rocks. Our motto is gather. A babe hears first of all through bone and water. The song of the mother before the mother becomes. The song of the mother she dreams to become. Take our dreaming as a torch. Solace upon the nose, upon the lips, upon the tongue. We rid your mouth of salt, of roses, of whistling. We good mouth your failing. We set you off knowing what we know. Death is a mystery bell tolling at the water's end. Death is a cargo of gold on a sinking ship and a bird rising out of the wreck. Solace upon the temple, upon the brow, upon the eyelids of our loved ones who have been lost. We close their mouths with light. We light wrap their bones. We prepare for them a bed of willow hand woven. See how the willow bends and yields, how it folds, how it offers back, how it glows. Each blade a milk fruit, each blade a peace blade. Who can know how the wave will turn, or when the wave will bolt? In the language of the mothers, a thumb is both a wave and the whole ocean. We keep the light for safe return.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Annemarie. Gorgeous. And Liz, if you would read for us now, please.
I will, of course. Annemarie, again, that was savage. I'm going to read the last three poems in the collection. The first one is a poem very much about keeping the shiny side out. My father is from a generation, I think, that even if their head was hanging off and you asked them how they were, they'd be like, "Sure, grand. Could be worse." So this poem is kind of a monument to that. This is called "Every Day is a Good Day Now." Under my window, a fella lumbers spent wheelie bins up a stocky flight of red brick. It's a dry day in September and all of us are alive. Under my window, the owl boys absolve each other of the day's mild sinning. Is there anything more ordinary than two men crossing ways with nothing rattling around in their heads and the world confined to the few steps in front of them? The steady seal of the front door at their closing, then dinner across the table from their wives, perhaps a late phone call from a daughter. And what's left of the promise of his last good days? My father in his stand-up hope, shuffling across the hospital atrium, his drips and drain bags, slow wheels and an upright pole to keep him steady, a metal cane one day, a metal frame another. The way he bestowed the gifts of his favour on a woman whose husband would leave that space under his own steam. Hope is a dying man wishing a healed man good health. Their goodbye a quick cortege ahead of its time. And what's worse, to shake hands with strangers till all strength leaves a body, or to resign forever to greet men with no complaints. Sure, every day is a good day now. It's interesting that we were talking about lockdown poems and the idea that we were all confined and we were all kind of searching out within our writing a little bit. For lockdown, I actually ended up sequestered in my family home with my mother. So it was very real for a long time in my house. And at the back of the house, there is actually a graveyard, and the graveyard wall is this big sort of a focal point. I would have hidden things in it when I was small. I would have climbed it, lots of different things. So I found myself hanging out down there during lockdown. It was my thinking spot. And I wrote this little love letter down there. This is called Love Letter to My Father. Dad, I've been talking to the dead, but no word yet. Just a scything wind to clip the legs right off me. I leave gifts at times where we've masoned your name to see if any claw lays claim or rummages for telltale turnings in the gravel. Down by the graveyard wall last night, I muddled ways to count your absence. The sum of days tonight are easy. Occasions, cakes and candles, easy too. When it's dark at the boundary between the living and the rest, I see footholds where pointing fell to dust. Witness spectral scrambles up and over, your horseshoes lurking, full of luck. Ghosts of matchboxes sniffed by rifle shot pellets, and the duppy of your brother's once kept horses. They trample buds and snuffle ghostly feed bags. These freezing nights, heat lifts off their long dead bodies, hulking reminders of what looms in the dark. In my nightly haunting, I gut myself like a fish to lay it all out before you. Your wife is as she will be. There's a hole, though. She's shot through spine to sternum from lack of you. The nights thin the barrier between ye, and I listen to her calling in the chill. You both modelled this way of living, taught me in the ways you held each other. My first teachers and my absent advisor, can you see me? Can you see all I tried to do to pay tribute to you, to her, to all you left behind? So I'll finish with this poem. That's the final poem in the book. There were a few other kerfuffles, shall I say, of things falling apart in this book. One of them is the end of my marriage. So that was a bit of crack. So I was kind of searching at the time for a sign. Sense, was I going to run off with the Hare Krishnas? Like, what was I going to do in this new world where my marriage was over and my father was dead? So I walked, and then one morning I came across an oracle in the shape of a fortune teller on Salt Hill Prom. So this poem is the encounter I had with Madame Helena, and this is called Madame Helena on the Prom. A move, a change, and a challenge, says Helena over crystals after I've parted with my cash. At Salt Hill Prom at mid-tide on a sun-blushed Tuesday, I spot her tacking a Dayglow poster on the windscreen. She calls to me, a siren song in plush velvet. Let Madame Helena tell you your future. I count my steps back to the Avensis, pledge to whatever power I am now praying that if I've cash in the car, I'll go back. What harm? Tell your mother not to worry, she says. Not specifically like, but in synonym. The way she smacks my hand, sucks her teeth. Helena has a booster pack for the mobile phone that could carry her voice all the way to the sky above, but she's soft with me. It won't always be like this, she promises. Like she can see my wedding ring move from finger to Cardash ashtray. A move, a change, and a challenge, she says, after I've parted with my cash. I was young. I'm still young. I will have no more children. The two I have were born lucky, not rich. Lucky, not rich. She says this twice, so no flies on Helena. High honours, a settled bed by the water, and there I will find peace. And there I will find peace. Her hand on mine around the crystal, which keeps my money where her mouth is. No more pain, she says. No death. And I ask her if sense can come from nonsense. Good news will come in the post. Good news will spill in the waves. She says I am strong and I will rise. I nearly believe her, to a height that will surprise friends and family. I say feck anyone who's surprised. The good friends I have around me I'll keep. She sees regret across the aisle, but the days of that love are past. My daughters will wear uniforms. My eldest girl, will she truly be a nurse, or is the youngest off to Templemore? Will I pass them all I have, like a draw rope, latch, pulley, lever, strength, discipline? And I'll be happy, she says, an abstract notion mid-half disaster, no matter how the sun shines in Salt Hill. And I know happy. It's books, my daughters. Happy is tea shared with my father the last time I saw him living. Helena wants to know my questions and all my mind can utter. What's next? Is it her? Is it her? Is it her? Be brave, says Helena. She says, be brave. Sure, what have you left to lose?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Liz. I'm so delighted you read that poem because it just floored me absolutely when I first read the book. And it's interesting. I think that the two of you in both collections, there's a lot about loss and about parenthood as well, but in ways that I think we don't often read about them traditionally, which is wonderful. And I think every generation has to clear its own space for writing about parenthood or motherhood, whether it's having children or the experience of being a child. And Liz, can you talk to me a little bit about how writing motherhood changed for you a bit between the first and the second collection? Because I think there's beautiful poems on parenthood in each of them.
Well, the first collection very much was about my role, like the importance of the decisions I was making with regards to mothering my two daughters. I came to motherhood through sort of non-biological, lesbian, same-sex marriage sort of a setup. So it was very much about that, my trying to be, the best that I could be. But then what happened between the first and the second collection is the lovely snuggly little babies that I could do everything for all of a sudden have independence and opinions and needs and wants of their own, and they're very forthright. I've raised these little independent, just like Mad Hatters, you know what I mean, where you never predict what's going to happen. And then I suppose at the same time that was happening and the girls were growing up and things were kind of going pear-shaped elsewhere, like when you find out that a parent is gravely ill, immediately you are like, but I'm your child, and what's going to happen to me? You know what I mean? So there's that as well. Memories start forming differently and things take on a different resonance. Like I feel that last poem there where Helena tells me to be brave, there's an echo in it for me of the day that Dad was diagnosed. He caught me in the room I'm in right now in Mom's house, and he said, you'll have to be brave now because you have to carry it for the rest of them, because that's what we do. I was like, okay. So then the poems were a place for me to kind of set down whatever I was carrying. Do you know what I mean? So it became this sort of space where I could go, actually, one time I was 8 and this happened. You know what I mean? So it was kind of important in that regard. And then like the family, it's like I had two different sort of kinship networks. I had my family of origin and the family I had created, but the two of them merged and just became pillars of the same sort of structure. So I feel that was one of the big changes as well. So it was organic, and it was just trying to pay attention to all that.
Yeah, it's funny coming to that place in your life where you realize that you're not the end of the chain anymore, you're in the middle of it. And that's kind of the link that matters the most. And I think many of us can be adults for years before we have to make that realization. So it's always kind of a shock, But I think that the writing and your poems in the book capture that sense of transition so beautifully. And as I said earlier, just the minute detail that you record, it's just so kind of precise and beautiful. But Anne-Marie, I'd love to talk to you as well, actually, about another kind of, I feel that your book it's made up of sequences, but also fractured sequences. And like the Balor and Etna poems are kind of a fractured sequence throughout the book. But there's also an amazing kind of odyssey that you undertake as well to a number of the sites of various mother and baby homes that were mentioned in the Ryan report, and poems that deal as well with that complicated familial legacy that we have in Ireland, and the many kind of broken and interrupted families of the past. Can you talk to us a little bit about that particular project within the book?
Well, I suppose my first collection, Blood Drip with Dura Press, it kind of really looked at the lives of Irish women under the founding of the new state, particularly unmarried mothers. And that subject is very close to my own heart because of a family connection with the mother and baby. And then without really kind of planning it in any conscious way, my focus kind of shifted, to thinking in this book about what happened, the children of that were through those homes. And this kind of motif of the stolen or disappeared child, the child that was missing in plain sight, began to kind of drift into focus. And So, I mean, the theme of family would be a recurring one for me. And I'm really interested in that, the mother-child bond and what happens when that's interrupted. And I suppose, at some stage into writing the book, I ordered copies of the Ryan Report, which looks at industrial and reform schools. So not the mother and baby homes, but other types institutions. And when the box came, it was that big, with the I started to read through the testimonies and the information related to that part of Irish history, but then I decided to set it all aside and to just try and encounter the sites left behind by these institutions. Some of the institutions and the sites have been repurposed or reimagined, and some of those buildings are derelict or run down, and some are completely disappeared. But I noted there what Liz said about, the encounter that she drew inspiration from for her poem. And I think that what I tried to do in this collection was to encounter the left behind sites of these institutions, and that was kind of my gateway then to writing about them. But it's a curious thing. I think as poets we become kind of obsessed, or there are recurring subjects that come up for us. And the collection is dedicated to my foster brother who died in 2014. But I suppose there's 3 generations of my family who have been caring for children in the in state care. So my grandmother, my parents, and during the writing of the book, I also cared for a young man who came to Ireland unaccompanied. So, I mean, many of the questions that came up in Bloodroot are here in this collection, but there's definitely a deepening of them, and a kind of new attention being paid to how the physical landscape looks after mother-child separation trauma. So I'd hoped to get to all of the institutions. I mean, the initial plan was to get to all of the institutions listed in the Ryan Report. And then with lockdown, that became not possible or practical. And then the book started to take shape in a different direction. But that's okay. That was organic and necessary, and lovely now interweaving with the myth of the Poison Glen and the histories of the state, and autobiography, of course, as well.
Absolutely. And I think that both of these collections are so marked by place and shaped by place and alive to the possibilities of place. And, from those institutions to that graveyard wall, Liz. And I think we probably are running out of time. So I'd just like to thank you both so much. It was absolutely a pleasure to hear both of your voices together. And Liz, I've just written down a move, a change, and a challenge, which I think should be our mantra for second collections always. Let's go for a move, a change, and a challenge. And I think that any readers will find those things in abundance in these 2 wonderful books. So Liz Quirk and Annemarie Ní Churreáin, I'd like to thank you both so much on behalf of myself and the Red Line Book Festival. And anybody watching us here today who's enjoyed this event should go and check out the rest of the programme on the Red Line Book Festival website. Thank you both.